nothing can be ruled out and no one can be blasé or complacent about this.
But Dr. Lyon said the testing and tracing of infected individuals would have to be a part of the strategy, along with the maintenance of strict social distancing and possibly the introduction of new rules like the wearing of gloves and masks on public transport.
Simon Jones. Immigration lawyers have questioned the scope of a government promise to extend visas for all migrant NHS workers following the coronavirus outbreak. Adrian Berry, the chair of the Immigration Law Practitioners Association, told MPs on the Home Affairs Committee that the extension had not been put into law and only covered those on certain visas. He was questioned by video link by the committee's Labour chair, Yvette Cooper.
So if you have a nurse who is here on a family reunion visa, and that visa is due to expire in 2 months' time, will they know whether or not they're covered by the extension at the moment?
It's not free from doubt. They won't know, and it appears that the emphasis is on Tier 2 work permits and not on those. It would appear not, and also that person could be on a no recourse to public funds endorsement as well, and so there's a double bind for such a person.
Mr Berry also accused the Home Office of a scattergun approach towards communicating its visa policy. The Home Office has said no one will be penalised for circumstances outside their control. Now, peers have questioned whether compensation for members of the Windrush generation will be allocated fairly. An independent peer complained that the same officials who'd failed people in the first place were now deciding claims. Mandy Baker reports.
500,000 people arrived in the UK after 1948 from Caribbean countries. Thousands were children travelling on their parents' passports with no documents of their own. In 2012, changes to immigration law meant those without papers had to produce evidence to continue working, access services, or even to remain in the UK. Some were held in detention or removed from the country. A report into the Windrush scandal concluded that the Home Office showed ignorance and thoughtlessness on the issue of race, and there was a profound institutional failure which turned thousands of people's lives upside down. A crossbench or independent peer, Lord Hastings, was worried that officials who'd presided over the debacle would now be making decisions on the compensation being paid to victims.
Who has left the Home Office in disgrace for being institutionally ignorant and thoughtless towards the issue of race? Or is everybody still in place with the same mindset, with the same approach, making those adjudications and informing how payments will be released?
The Home Office Minister, Lady Williams, said she understood his concern.
The Home Office is absolutely determined to learn the lessons and right the wrongs experienced by the Windrush generation, and the compensation team is working hard to ensure that people get the compensation they absolutely deserve. She said that if the scheme was taken out of the hands of the Home Office, it would delay payments significantly. The Liberal Democrat leader in the Lords, Lord Newby, didn't feel the government had a grip on the issue.
The impact assessment states that the cost will be between £20.5 and £301.3 million. The 15-fold degree of uncertainty is almost certainly unprecedented and suggests that the Home Office really has no idea of the true scale of the problem.
Lady Bull, a crossbench peer, said many of the Windrush generation arrived to help build the new National Health Service in 1948. These same people, she said, answered the call to come out of retirement to help tackle coronavirus.
Despite the prejudice they faced in their careers, despite spending decades nursing others only to be denied healthcare when they needed it themselves, despite their children being told they were aliens in the only country that they had ever called home, many of these nurses and doctors have put their own safety on the line and signed up. So the Windrush generation and their descendants have twice answered the call to help this country through its darkest hours.
For Labour, Lord Kennedy said his party supported the idea of payments.
Any financial compensation and any apology can only go so far to alleviate the hurt, the injustice that's befallen people. People have been treated so badly.
And that was something no one should forget.
All of those people that have since passed away, not alive to see the action being taken today to at least correct the wrong that was done to them.
The Home Office Minister, Lady Williams, said no compensation could ever hope to undo the injustice of being told you were not welcome in your homeland.
But we hope that the Windrush compensation scheme can go some way to righting the wrongs of the past, and in particular towards easing the financial burden some endured as a result. My Lords, that is why, even in the midst of the current circumstances, we have this bill before us, to fulfil our commitment to the Windrush generation and to discharge our financial duties to Parliament responsibly.
And the legislation giving financial authority for payments to be made passed all its stages in the Lords without a vote.
Mandy Baker. 2 new Conservative members of the House of Lords took their seats. Stephen, now Lord Greenhalgh, recently appointed a minister in both the Home Office and the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, and the businessman Sir Jerry Grimston, who's another recent recruit to the government. He's a business and trade minister. As is usual for new peers, he took the oath of allegiance.
I, Gerald, Lord Grimstone of Boscobel, do swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, her heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
But that oath was one of the few elements of the introduction ceremony to survive the new rules on social distancing. Both new peers wore suits rather than the traditional scarlet parliamentary robes, and they entered the chamber separately from their sponsors. There was also a certain amount of new choreography required to ensure that they could sign the Lord's Register without getting too close to officials. And that brings us to the closing headline from Westminster. The Commons approved new arrangements that will allow MPs to question ministers by video link. Under the proposals, which are designed to comply with social distancing rules, no more than 50 MPs will be allowed in the Commons chamber at any one time. I'm Sean Curran. The editor was David Cornock. And that was Today in Parliament.
BBC News at midnight. This is Chris Aldridge. The Health Secretary has rejected claims that the government has failed to respond to British companies offering to make protective equipment for health workers treating coronavirus patients. The number of deaths in England and Wales from all causes has increased to the highest weekly level for 20 years. Oil prices have continued to plummet, with the price of Brent crude dropping below $20 a barrel for the first time in 18 years. The head of the World Food Programme has warned that the economic impact of the pandemic could lead to 30 million people dying of hunger in the coming months. The video streaming service Netflix says it's signed up millions more subscribers as people stuck at home seek entertainment. The government is facing increasing pressure over its strategy for supplying personal protective equipment to the NHS and care homes, amid claims from Labour that it's been ignoring offers of help from British companies. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says firms have told him they've been contacting the government but not hearing anything back. Speaking at the daily news briefing, the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, insisted that all offers were being investigated and officials were now working with more than 150 potential UK manufacturers. Sir Keir said there was a gap between the government's words and the reality on the ground. A shipment of PPE, due to be brought to the UK from Turkey, is still there. Here's our assistant political editor, Norman Smith.
Although the government has insisted it's pursuing all options to secure adequate supplies of protective clothing, growing evidence is emerging that many British companies who've offered to provide equipment have either been rejected or ignored. Instead, some are now choosing to send their stocks of vital gowns, gloves and other garments abroad. This comes as the government is seeking to source additional supplies of PPE from countries as diverse as Turkey and China. Labour, who've urged the government to make use of indigenous British textile companies, say they've been inundated with cases of British firms who've offered in vain to make equipment. And tonight, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, said there was a growing gap between what the government said about PPE supplies and the experience of many frontline staff.
Manufacturers here saying, look, we stepped up, we offered, we didn't really hear back from the government, and yet at the same time we've got planes trying to bring stuff back from abroad. So something's clearly going wrong. And there are even some manufacturers who said they, having not heard from the government, they're now shipping their stuff abroad to other countries. So there's a problem here that needs to be solved quickly.
The government have confirmed they've had almost 8,000 offers from companies willing to provide protective clothing. However, ministers have chosen to focus their efforts on those that can provide large quantities of equipment, often based abroad. They also dispute that they failed to respond to some smaller British companies who've offered to help. And at this afternoon's Downing Street news conference, this was the response of the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock.
Not everyone who approaches us can deliver on their offers in scale. I'm very grateful to all those who have come forward, and we are now actively engaged with thousands of these companies, and I can announce that we're working with 159 potential UK manufacturers which are starting to come on stream.
However, the experience of Interflex, an automotive parts company in Nottinghamshire, appears far from unique. Their boss, Jim Griffin, offered to provide 1 million face visors as well as gowns, but after an initial response from the Crown purchasing team on Friday, has heard nothing more. Mr. Griffin is now planning to export his PPE clothing to other countries, and this evening expressed incredulity at the government's approach.
Do not understand why we're having to send aircraft out to Turkey and other places when we can make non-sterile aprons, face shields. In fact, we can cut most materials on our equipment, which is now standing idle, waiting for the car entries to start back. Why don't people get in touch?
The government described the distribution of PPE as a problem of unprecedented scale and complexity, and at the weekend brought in the former boss of the London Olympics, Lord Dayton, in an effort to improve supplies. More than a month into this crisis, however, many health workers may feel the government has already had more than enough time to get a grip.
The Foreign Office's most senior civil servant, Sir Simon MacDonald, has withdrawn his assertion that the government made a political decision not to take part in an EU scheme to obtain medical equipment to fight coronavirus. Sir Simon made his initial remark in evidence to MPs, but issued a clarification tonight after he was contradicted by the Health Secretary. Here's our diplomatic correspondent, James Landale.
The government was criticised last month for not taking part in a European Union scheme to bulk buy ventilators and protective equipment that could be used to tackle coronavirus. Ministers denied accusations that the decision was driven by anti-EU bias and instead claimed emails from Brussels had gone astray. Today, the top civil servant at the Foreign Office, Sir Simon MacDonald, told the Foreign Affairs Committee it was actually a political decision by ministers who'd been briefed on the options by diplomats in Brussels. Within the hour, the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, categorically denied this, and later this evening, Sir Simon issued an extraordinary retraction saying there had been a misunderstanding and it had been incorrect for him to say there'd been a political decision not to take part. Mr. Hancock told the Downing Street press briefing the government had since then joined up to the joint EU scheme, but officials made clear this would initially involve therapeutics. The European Commission said the UK would miss out on the first orders of ventilators and protective equipment, which had yet to be delivered.
The total number of deaths in England and Wales from all causes has risen to its highest weekly level since the year 2000. In the 7 days to April the 10th, the Office for National Statistics says 18,500 people died, around 8,000 more than would be expected at this time of year. A third of cases were linked to coronavirus, while in care homes, deaths related to Covid-19 quadrupled in a week. But separate figures showing daily mortality rates in UK hospitals have renewed hopes that the peak of the crisis may have passed. Our science correspondent Pallab Ghosh has been looking at the numbers.
The ONS figures show that the overall number of deaths for the week up to April the 10th was the highest for 20 years. A similar trend is being reported in Scotland, where there were nearly 2,000 deaths in the week up to the 12th, and the number in Northern Ireland is also up. Nick Stripe from the ONS said that these latest figures showed that coronavirus accounted for a greater proportion of deaths compared with statistics from last week.
There are unprecedented levels of deaths for this time of year. If you remember last week, we were seeing about 1 in 5 of all deaths mentioning COVID on death certificates. Now this week it's 1 in 3, which is quite a big jump in that number.
The vast majority of the deaths, 6,200, is attributable to coronavirus, but the remainder, 2,300, may be because the lockdown is having an indirect impact on health. People with other illnesses might be avoiding going to hospital, or there might be increased deaths arising from worsening mental health issues or domestic violence. Over the same period, there were more than 1,000 deaths linked to Covid-19 in care homes, 4 times higher than the previous week. But Sam Monaghan, who runs a company in charge of 220 homes, says it's difficult to assess exactly how these individuals died.
We've been given advice by GPs that in many of our homes, if we've had a case where somebody has died of COVID, then any subsequent deaths need to be recorded as suspected COVID. The other problem is that GPs are no longer coming in, so we have not got medical experts making these final pronouncements in terms of causes of death.
The ONS is now working with the Care Quality Commission, which regulates social care services in England, to tease out more details of the cause of death in care homes. Separately, another 823 COVID-related deaths have been announced in hospitals across the UK. The figure is a jump from yesterday when it was 449 and 596 on Saturday, but it's based on data collected over several days. With this factored in, the number of deaths is continuing to decline, backing the view that we may be past the peak of the epidemic.
The government's COVID-19 testing coordinator believes there's now enough capacity to swab any frontline worker who needs to be checked, including police officers and teachers. Professor John Newton says 27 drive-in facilities are up and running, while more swabs are being delivered to hospitals and people's homes for anyone unable to get to a testing centre. Around 20,000 tests are currently being taken each day, against a target of 100,000, which the government said it would meet by the end of the month. Professor Newton insists that improvements are continually being made to the system.
There's huge progress being made in building lab capacity. We now have a number of ways of meeting demand and matching that capacity to demand. But the real aim is to secure the testing capability that the country needs. And I'm confident that we have that and we'll be able to allow the country to respond with the testing that is required.
The Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, says he's throwing everything at developing a coronavirus vaccine, and human trials will begin on Thursday at Oxford University. Another team of scientists based at Imperial College in London is also racing to find a vaccine. Mr. Hancock said the UK was at the front of a global effort to produce a successful vaccine, but he also sounded a note of caution.
Nothing about this process is certain. Vaccine development is a process of trial and error and trial again. That's the nature of how vaccines are developed. But I've told Sarah Gilbert and Robin Shattuck, 2 of our most inspiring scientists, that we are going to back them to the hilt and give them every resource that they need to get the best possible chance of success as soon as possible.
There are concerns that thousands of foreign healthcare staff in the UK have not been guaranteed extensions to their visas. Immigration lawyers say a scheme announced by the Home Office does not apply to hospital porters, healthcare assistants or agency staff. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent, Danny Shaw.
The healthcare sector in the UK employs more than 100,000 workers from outside the European Union. Most have jobs in the NHS. To help tackle the pandemic, the Home Office announced last month that overseas doctors, nurses and paramedics whose work visas run out in the next 6 months could stay for another year along with their families. But the Immigration Law Practitioners Association says the visa extension programme does not include hospital support staff, such as cleaners and porters, healthcare workers employed by agencies and private clinics, and medics who are allowed to work in Britain because of family ties. The association says it's unfair and unrealistic to expect such workers whose visas may be expiring to spend thousands of pounds applying for permits to be renewed while helping the UK deal with the health emergency. The Home Office said it would continue to work to see if it could assist other frontline workers during the crisis.
There's been further turbulence on global oil markets because of the pandemic, with the price of Brent crude slipping below $20 a barrel for the first time in 18 years. One key oil price turned negative on Monday as producers paid buyers to take supplies off their hands. President Trump has offered financial support to US oil companies. Here's our North America business reporter, Michelle Fleury.
Hundreds of US oil companies could go bankrupt. Donald Trump wants to save them, tweeting that he's instructed his administration to come up with a plan to make funds available to help America's beleaguered oil industry. The promise comes after US crude oil prices crashed into negative territory. An epic collapse in demand caused by the coronavirus has led to storage problems. As the barrels of oil pile up, the world is running out of places to put them. Mr. Trump tried to downplay the historic price drop as a short-term problem. Yet other oil contracts are signalling trouble as well. US oil for June delivery dropped over 35%, and Brent crude, which is seen as the global benchmark for oil, fell below $20 a barrel.
President Trump has said his temporary ban on immigration to the United States will last for 60 days and is designed to protect American workers. He said he had a solemn duty to ensure people could return to jobs once the coronavirus crisis ended. Mr. Trump said around 20 states, representing some 40% of the US population, were now making plans to safely restart their economies. Here's our North America correspondent, Peter Bowes.
President Trump first indicated in a late-night tweet with few details that he was planning to suspend all immigration to the United States in response to the invisible enemy, the term he's used to describe coronavirus. He elaborated on the plan at the latest White House briefing.
By pausing immigration, we'll help put unemployed Americans first in line for jobs as America reopens. So important. It would be wrong and unjust for Americans laid off by the virus to be replaced with new immigrant labor flown in from abroad. We must first take care of the American worker, take care of the American worker.
Over the past month, 22 million US workers have filed for unemployment benefit. Mr. Trump said the immigration ban will be in effect for 60 days, when it will be subject to a review. It would apply to those seeking permanent residency in the United States, known as a green card, and would not affect people entering the country on a temporary basis. Earlier, an official at the White House told the Reuters news agency the president's order would include exemptions for people involved in responding to the coronavirus outbreak, including farm workers and those helping to secure US food supplies.
The executive director of the World Food Programme has warned that the coronavirus outbreak is pushing the planet to the brink of what he's called a hunger pandemic. David Beasley said this year could see the worst humanitarian crisis since the Second World War. Here's our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette.
The message from David Beasley is the world has to act quickly to secure food and funding to feed millions in what he called a global hunger pandemic. On a video link from his desk in Washington, he set out what could lie ahead.
Well, worst fear right now, if we lose our funding or lose supply chain access, we're talking about 30 million people. Literally over a few months could die. That's without putting the new numbers of COVID on top of that. So we are literally looking at biblical proportions of famine.
Asked about donors' readiness to provide aid when their own countries were suffering, Mr. Beasley said no donor had told him they would turn their back on the most vulnerable. But he admitted many governments still had to assess the full impact of financial crises at home. He cautioned that chaos in the worst affected places could fuel greater migration as well as extremism. The world will end up paying for this, he said, one way or another. So we need to solve this together on the basis of facts, not fear.
The British Iranian woman Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, who was jailed in Iran, has had her temporary release from prison extended by a month. Mrs. Zaghari-Ratcliffe was accused 4 years ago of plotting to overthrow the Iranian regime, something she's always denied. She's been allowed out along with thousands of other prisoners because of the coronavirus outbreak. The video streaming service Netflix says it added 15.8 million subscribers around the world in the first quarter of 2020, nearly double the figure for the previous 3 months. The company said it was fortunate to be operating a service which had been boosted by the coronavirus lockdowns, but it warned investors the pandemic had also created challenges. From San Francisco, our technology reporter Zoe Thomas has more details.
Netflix earned almost £5 billion in the first quarter of this year. However, in a letter to shareholders, the company called its dramatic uptick in subscribers temporary. While Netflix has been able to provide a much-in-demand service during the coronavirus pandemic, it has had to pause production of new shows. And a stronger U.S. dollar means that international subscribers won't bring in as much revenue. There are also long-term challenges for Netflix. Most importantly, the increased amount of competition in the streaming space. Disney Plus has already begun challenging Netflix, and later this year, HBO Max and the Comcast-owned Peacock will launch in the U.S. The big challenge for any streaming service will be retaining subscribers when lockdown measures eventually lift.
One of the UK's biggest insurance companies, Admiral, is giving a £25 refund to drivers because the pandemic has led to them using their vehicles less often. Millions of customers will receive the money in the next few weeks if they had a policy on the 20th of April. The move is likely to put pressure on other motor insurers to pay rebates as well. Here's our personal finance correspondent, Simon Gompertz.
Insurers have faced a barrage of complaints about their response to the disruption caused by the virus, from holidaymakers trying to claim using travel insurance and from traders attempting to get money back via their business interruption policies. Admiral says that because people are making fewer journeys, there are fewer accidents and claims, so it will pay back £110 million it thinks it'll save during the lockdown to owners of nearly 4.5 million cars and vans. That's £25 for each one, paid by the end of May. There's pressure on other insurance companies to do the same. The consumer group Which says people will remember how businesses treated them during the crisis. Some providers are offering to defer payments for those who are struggling, but drivers have been asking why they're having to pay the original amount for a service they're hardly using. Admiral is the first to break ranks and return what it says is typically a month's premium.
In the city, the 100 share index closed down 172 points, a fall of 3% at 5,641. On Wall Street, the Dow Jones ended the day down 632 points, a fall of 2.67% at 23,019. On the currency markets, against the dollar, the pound is down 1.6 cents at $1.23. Against the euro, sterling is down 1.4 cents at €1.13, making a euro worth 88.4 pence. The biggest inquiry into poor maternity care in the UK has revealed it is now looking at nearly 1,200 cases. The investigation was launched in 2017 to examine avoidable harm to mothers and babies at Shrewsbury and Telford NHS Trust. Our social affairs correspondent Michael Buchanan reports.
This inquiry was set up to look into allegations of poor maternity care involving 23 families. Today, the review team announced it had identified 1,170 cases of either poor or questionable care at the Shrewsbury and Telford Trust. While some cases date back to the late 1970s, it's understood the vast majority of allegations are from 1998 onwards. An internal review by the Trust last year identified 330 cases of poor maternity outcomes between 2007 and 2018, and those families have received letters this week asking for their explicit consent to be included in the inquiry. Similar letters have been sent to an additional 70 families who had raised their cases directly with the Trust. The chair of the review, Donna Ockenden, has also announced a deadline for any other families to get in touch.
Any new families that want to come forward really must try and do that by the end of May. We appreciate that coming forward to the maternity review is a really brave thing to do, and that for some families it takes time to make that decision.
A leaked report last year suggested that dozens of babies had died unnecessarily or suffered avoidable harm at the Trust. The final report is due to be published next year.
The authorities in Canada say 23 people are now known to have been killed in a mass shooting in Nova Scotia on Saturday. The gunman, who was disguised as a policeman, was shot dead by officers. A former rapper from West London who went to Syria in 2013 to join the Islamic State group has been arrested in Spain. Abdelmajid Abdelbari became a notorious figure in the IS. The Spanish National Police said they had arrested one of Europe's most wanted foreign terrorist fighters. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent, Daniel Sanford.
The Policia Nacional released a video of the operation to arrest 3 men hiding in a rented apartment in Almeria. They said the men had entered Spain illegally from North Africa and had adapted themselves to the Covid-19 emergency, rarely going out and wearing face masks when they did. They described one of the men as a most wanted Daesh foreign terrorist fighter and of Egyptian nationality. The BBC understands he is Abdelmajid Abdelbari, a 28-year-old man who grew up in West London, becoming a rapper known as Lyricist Jinn before travelling to join Islamic State, where he made extremely violent videos. He'd been born in Egypt and moved to the UK when he was 6 years old. In 2014, his father, Adel Abdelbari, pleaded guilty in the United States to conspiring to kill in the 1998 Al-Qaeda bombing of the US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. Spanish police said they were trying to identify the other 2 men arrested with him.
The chairman of the public inquiry into the Manchester Arena bombing, Sir John Saunders, has refused a request for 56 survivors to be given core participant status. His ruling means the group will not be legally represented at the inquiry, which is scheduled to begin in September. 22 people were killed by a suicide bomber at the end of an Ariana Grande concert in May 2017. A man who is wanted in the UK in connection with the deaths of 39 people whose bodies were found in a lorry container in Essex last year has appeared in court in the Republic of Ireland. Prosecutors want to charge Ronan Hughes with manslaughter and an immigration offence. Our Ireland correspondent Chris Page reports.
Ronan Hughes was detained at his home under the terms of a European arrest warrant. He's 40 and from County Monaghan in the Republic of Ireland. If he's extradited to the UK, he'll be charged with 39 counts of manslaughter and 1 of conspiracy to assist unlawful immigration. The judge at the High Court in Dublin remanded Ronan Hughes in custody until next week. The people whose bodies were found in Grays in Essex in October were all from Vietnam. Earlier this month, Mo Robinson, a lorry driver from Craigavon in Northern Ireland, pleaded guilty to charges linked to the deaths. He hasn't been sentenced yet. Prosecutors in Britain also want to charge another driver, Eamon Harrison, who's appealing against his extradition from the Irish Republic. 4 more men are due to stand trial in London in the autumn.
The former performance director of UK Athletics, Neil Black, has died suddenly at the age of 60. The cause of death has not been revealed. Neil Black stepped down from his role last year amid criticism of his links to the American coach Alberto Salazar, who was given a 4-year ban from the sport for doping violations. Here's our sports news reporter, Laura Scott.
For more than 25 years, Neil Black worked with the country's top track and field stars and rose to become one of the most important figures in British sport as UK Athletics performance director. But long before his appointment in 2012, he struck up a close relationship with Sir Mo Farah, one of many athletes to pay tribute to him. Neil supported me all the way in my career since I was a kid, the 4-time Olympic gold medalist said. I wouldn't be where I am today without him. Yet in recent years, Neil Black's close ties with Farah's now disgraced former coach Alberto Salazar became a source of controversy and criticism. He left UK Athletics last October, shortly after Salazar was banned for doping violations. The organisation said it was shocked and saddened by his death, adding that he would be hugely missed by those that knew and worked with him.
Now for a look at the morning papers, and the Daily Express says the prospect of human trials of a vaccine to protect against coronavirus raises the hope that Britain may lead the world out of the pandemic. The announcement is the main news in the paper, as well as in the Times and the Eye. The Daily Telegraph reports that tests for coronavirus given to NHS staff have been found to be flawed, and that thousands of doctors and nurses who thought they were free of the virus may have been sent back to work while contagious. Public Health England says no diagnostic test is 100% sensitive, and the tests were inconsistent in less than 2% of samples. It's now switching to commercially produced test kits and says that was always the plan. The Guardian reports that dozens of patients with Covid-19 have been turned away from the showpiece Nightingale Hospital in London because there were too few nurses to treat them. And there's continuing criticism of efforts to obtain the vast quantities of protective equipment required by health and care workers. The Daily Mirror says 500,000 plastic visors may be sent abroad by a firm in Nottingham because the NHS hasn't placed an order. Its verdict? Scandalous. People in the UK have been showing their support for NHS workers in many ways, from the weekly round of applause to sponsored challenges to raise money for the health service. Now, the nation's artists are joining in by offering free portraits to those working on the front line. It's the idea of an Oxford-based artist, as our arts editor Will Gompertz reports.
Traditionally, having your portrait painted was a sign of status, a permanent record acknowledging a great accomplishment. It was with this in mind that Tom Croft decided to post an Instagram message offering a free portrait to the first NHS doctor or nurse who contacted him.
When the lockdown first started, I was really struggling, as I know a lot of artists were, to find almost the point in their work. And so I thought about a portrait being a celebration of people achieving extraordinary things, maybe in their professional lives, and who is more deserving at the moment than the heroes on the front line of the NHS.
The artist was inundated with hundreds of requests from doctors and nurses around the country, with the first coming from Harriet Durkin, an A&E nurse at the Manchester Royal Infirmary. So, true to his word, Tom got to work painting Harriet in her full PPE. He focused in on her head, cropping close with the nurse looking down through her visor, with the majority of her face covered by a mask.
I'll have that picture forever and be able to look back and remember what a difficult time it has been, but people that I work with, people that I call my friends, everybody coming together, I can look back and think, gosh, very emotional.
Harriet is one of around 500 NHS doctors and nurses currently being painted by artists who've signed up to Tom Croft's initiative under the hashtag Portraits for NHS Heroes. The hope is to have an exhibition of them all once the lockdown is lifted, as the culmination of an idea that has already been adopted in America, Belgium, Spain and Ireland.
The headlines again. The government has rejected accusations that it has ignored British companies offering to make protective equipment for healthcare workers treating coronavirus patients. The total number of deaths in England and Wales from all causes has risen to its highest weekly level for 20 years. Human trials of a new coronavirus vaccine are to start in the UK within days. President Trump has said his ban on all immigration to the US will last for 60 days and will help protect American workers when the lockdown lifts. The video streaming service Netflix says it has signed up nearly 16 million new customers worldwide in the first part of the year. BBC News.
Read by Chris Aldridge. In a moment here on Radio 4, I choose the codename Fred. A hairdresser becomes a Stasi spy as we return to our story of a man who dug a tunnel under the Berlin Wall into East Germany. Tunnel 29 continues after we take a look at the weather. A quick roundup of Tuesday's weather first of all. Another sunny but windy day for most places. The warmest spots were Porthmadog in Gwynedd and Bournemouth in Dorset, both measuring 21 Celsius. Early on Tuesday morning there was a frost in Aberdeenshire with temperatures falling as low as -6 Celsius in Braemar. And there could be a frost in the Scottish Glens again tonight where winds are lighter. For many, temperatures will fall to 3 to 6 Celsius as it stays breezy. It'll continue dry and clear for most tonight. However, the Pennines, southern uplands and Welsh hills will see patchy low cloud develop. Tomorrow will be dry and warm once any patchy low cloud disperses, but the sunshine may be hazy at times, particularly in the south. The easterly breeze will persist, keeping North Sea coasts cooler, but not as windy as it was on Tuesday. It should be a warmer day as well. 17 or 18 degrees Celsius is likely in western Scotland and Northern Ireland in the afternoon. Coastal North Sea areas will be a little cooler, but elsewhere in England and Wales, temperatures will widely reach 20 or 21 Celsius. Thursday will continue dry, sunny and warm once any low cloud disperses. Easterly winds will be lighter than those of previous days, so it will feel warmer. Sunshine will be hazy at times in the north. Temperatures could reach 23 Celsius in southern England. On Friday, early fog patches in the north and east will lift to leave warm, sunny periods, but it'll be cloudier in Shetland with the odd shower. And that's the weather. Now here on Radio 4, we return to our 10-part series about an extraordinary escape under the Berlin Wall. Helena Merriman brings us Tunnel 29.
Einschließlich der Grenze zu den Berliner Westsektoren.
Only a few yards from freedom, people watched gravely from flats as the sealing off went on.
And that's when I decided to escape. And then we saw this path. We turned a corner and came across a small group of houses, but there was no street sign. Inside there was a man wearing a uniform. We stood there just looking at him. We didn't know what to do. And then suddenly, his eyes opened.
From BBC Radio 4, this is Tunnel 29. I'm Helena Merriman. Chapter 2, The Spy.
He lifted the window, leaned forward and said, "Boys, where have you come from in the middle of the night?" And just one question ran through my mind. Have we made it to the west? Or are we still in the east? We stuttered. We didn't know what to say. Then suddenly he said, "I know where you're from. 2 boys like you escaped through here a couple of days ago. You've made it. Congratulations." Oh, we couldn't believe it. I fell into my friend's arms. There's a German expression. Mir ist ein Stein vom Herz gefallen, which means a stone falling from your heart. And that's how it felt. We've been dreaming about this for weeks, and now we've done it.
So Joachim's made it to West Berlin, and like most who escape from the east, he's taken to this refugee camp in a district called Bachinfelde. He's given food, somewhere to rest, and then he's questioned by the CIA, the American intelligence agency, because since the wall went up, these refugees are the only way they can find out what's really going on in East Germany. So Joachim answers their questions, and he's so helpful, they take him to a CIA safe house. And finally, 16 hours after he arrives, they let him sleep.
The next morning I came down to breakfast, and I was starving. I remember on the table they had a big plate of toast. So I picked up one of the pieces, buttered it, and then reached for the jam. I spread it onto the toast, took a bite, and... oh, I melted. I'd never tasted anything like it. It was marmalade, but not like I knew it.
This wasn't any old marmalade. This was pineapple marmalade.
And I'd never tasted pineapple before. It didn't exist in the East. You can't imagine what it was like to taste it for the first time. I was addicted.
He had it for breakfast, then lunch, then supper, then breakfast again.
I don't remember eating anything apart from pineapple marmalade for days.
He eats and he eats. And in fact, we're going to leave him sitting in that house in West Berlin, gorging on that marmalade, because there's something else happening that day, the 20th of September 1961, something that will set Joachim on a collision course with the most terrifying part of the East German government. It involves a man called Siegfried. He's a hairdresser, slim, blonde, 21 years old, and he's just been caught by the police with hundreds of smuggled cigarettes in his bag. He's taken into a room, and sitting at the table is a Stasi officer, a senior member of the East German secret police. And Siegfried is terrified. He's heard all about the special Stasi prisons, the long interrogations, the forced confessions. And over the next few hours, he tells them everything. How the cigarettes were for a, quote, homosexual and lesbian orgy. That's how the Stasi describe it. Siegfried is gay, which was illegal, so he knows he's in trouble. But then the man leans forward and tells him there's a way out. There's an old East German joke. Why do Stasi officers make such good taxi drivers? Because you get in the car and they already know your name and where you live. The whole point of the Stasi was to know everything about you. What you do, how you think, who you're married to, who you're sleeping with.
24.12.62, 8:30 Uhr.
These are some recordings made by the Stasi from the early 60s. They got them by hiding microphones and cameras in people's homes, and they put them in telephones or light fittings, and they'd listen to everything. Children's parties, arguments, family dinners, and then on top of this they had informants, and it's really these informants that make the Stasi so powerful. They had hundreds of thousands of them, a higher proportion of the population than any other secret police in history. And so, back to this moment with Siegfried. What's happening is a classic bit of Stasi recruitment. Find dirt on someone and then offer them a choice. Prison or...
I voluntarily consent to actively support the security forces of the GDR in their righteous fight.
Like many before him, Siegfried chooses to join them rather than be destroyed by them.
Furthermore, I pledge to maintain absolute silence to everyone about my cooperation with the forces of the Ministry of State Security.
And he writes what's called a letter of commitment for his handlers.
If I break this commitment, I can be punished according to the current laws of the GDR. For my cooperation with the Ministry for Security, I choose the code name Fred.
And that's how Siegfried User becomes a Stasi spy. And we know all of this from the very detailed files the Stasi wrote about him. They're kept alongside all the other Stasi documents in a huge underground vault in the east of Berlin, in what used to be the Stasi headquarters. Wow, that's extraordinary. And when you walk inside, you see rows and rows of heavy white pull-out shelves containing the files. And apparently, if you were to lay these files on the ground end to end, there'd be over 100 kilometers of them. Is that noise air conditioning?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it what preserves the files better?
Keeps the constant temperature of 18 degrees.
Right.
So that's better for the material. Right.
When I started working on this story, I asked the archives for everything they had on Siegfried User. They sent us 2,735 documents just on this one informant, which gives you an idea of how thorough they are. And some of those files set out what they discover about him when they carry out their final set of checks before officially giving him the job. I'm holding that report now, and there are pages and pages of details. What newspaper he reads, what books he likes. He hates cheap romance novels, loves Tolstoy. It's got details on his favourite hobbies. One of them's flower arranging. It even says what brand of cigarettes he smokes and his favourite drink, which is cognac. And what's interesting is that you can tell that the Stasi actually quite like him. He's not unintelligent, they write. And they're clearly impressed that he's been to the doctors to try to, quote, cure himself of his homosexuality. But the key bit in their report is this. They say Siegfried User has the perfect combination of the right kind of politics and a desire for money that'll make him a great informant. And so a few weeks later, he starts officially. They even give him his first bit of pocket money. And then they give him a very specific instruction to look for Fluchthelfer, which means escape helpers, which are people in the West, usually students, who help people in the East escape. And with that, Siegfried User, now a Stasi spy, is put to work. It's now just a few weeks later, October 1961, and Joachim is trying to make a new life for himself in West Berlin.
Those first few weeks were hard. I was realizing the West was completely different to the East. It was louder, faster. And in those first few days, something had become clear to me. I was on my own now.
He'd spent so long thinking about how to get over the wall. that he hadn't thought much about life beyond it. And now here he is on his own in the West, where everything is new. Remember, the country he'd left was a communist dictatorship. It enforced collective potty breaks at nurseries. It put on communal evening sports sessions for its workers. That's what he's grown up with. And now he's in a country where you can do whatever you want, when you want, where you want. Bars are open all night, and it's as though with every bit of life, West Berliners are saying, we're different to the East. Yes, we're the same city, but we're a different country. And it's in this new country that Joachim needs to find a new life. He has his freedom, but what will he do with it?
So I decided to go to a university to carry on my engineering course. On my first day there, I went to find out what lectures I should be doing.
And back in the East, this was pretty easy. You'd be given a schedule telling you exactly where to go and when.
But here, in the West, we had nothing. There were so many different options. I was really confused. So I went to see the student rep, and he said, well, that's how we do things here. You can choose which lectures you go to. You have to work out your schedule yourself. I know this doesn't sound like a big deal, but it was also new to me. It was freedom, but too much. I couldn't cope with it.
And then there were his friends. Back in the East, they'd been everything to him, especially since his father wasn't around. And now he was all alone, which might explain the decision he makes a few weeks later.
I was in my bedroom on the university campus. I was reading a book, and I heard a knock on the door. There were two guys standing there. I knew them a little. They were Italians. They studied at the same university as me. One was called Mimo, the other Gigi. I invited them in, and we sat down. They told me they knew I was from the East, and they said they had a friend there who wanted to get out. The problem was, he had a wife and baby, and they couldn't just do what we did, escape over the border. So these two guys had come up with a different plan. They wanted to build a tunnel.
A tunnel that would go from the West into the East. And they're telling him all this for one reason.
They wanted my help.
So here he is. He's finally making a new life for himself. He's studying. But now here are these students, people he doesn't even know, asking him to tunnel back into the country he's only just escaped from. He could be killed, thrown in prison. Which is why, out of all the decisions Joachim tells me about, this is the one I just can't get my head around.
I said yes.
A few weeks later, Siegfried, the hairdresser and Stasi informant, is in a bar in West Berlin. He gets chatting to a group of guys there, talks to them about all sorts of things, music, politics. But then he starts asking about something else. Escape stories. As of course he would. Remember, he's working on his new secret mission to catch people in the West who are helping people in the East escape. And at some point, one of the guys leans in towards Siegfried. He knows about a particular group of people, he says, people who are trying to get some friends out of the East. They're university students. He's talking about the network that Joachim has just joined. Siegfried listens closely, then asks, could this guy help him find them? Sure, he says. Let's go.
I see a road where I go, where you go. You see a man, no one knows, no one knows.
Tunnel 29 was produced and presented by Helena Merriman. The editor is Richard Knight. You can listen to episode 3 tomorrow at the same time, and you can download the whole series now on BBC Sounds. Coming up next here on Radio 4, the Shipping Bulletin. Here's Sailing By to take us there. And now the shipping forecast, issued by the Met Office on behalf of the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency at 0015 on Wednesday, the 22nd of April. The general synopsis at 1800. High Norwegian Sea, 1036, expected just north of Fair Isle, 1033, by 1800 Wednesday. New low expected eastern France, 1013, by same time. The area forecasts for the next 24 hours. Viking North Utsira, variable 3 or less, becoming northerly 3 or 4. Fog patches in north, moderate or good, occasionally very poor in north. South Utsira, variable 3 or less, fair, good. South 40s, easterly 4 or 5, fair, good. North 40s, Cromarty, variable mainly easterly 3 or 4, fair, good. Forth, easterly 3 or 4, occasionally 5 in south, fair, good. Tyne Dogger, east 4 or 5, occasionally 6 at first, fair, good. Fisher, variable 3 or 4, fair, good. German Bight, Humber, east or northeast 4 or 5, occasionally 6 at first, fair, good. Thames, Dover, White, Portland, northeast 5 or 6, fair, good. Plymouth, northeast 4 or 5, occasionally 6 at first, fair, good. Biscay, cyclonic 4 or 5, becoming variable 3 at times, showers, good. Trafalgar, northerly 4 or 5, occasionally 6 in east, showers, good. Fitzroy, cyclonic in east, otherwise northerly 4 or 5, occasionally 6 in southeast, showers, good. Seoul, north or northeast 4 or 5, mainly fair, good. Lundy, northeast 4 or 5, occasionally 6 in east, fair, good. Fastnet, northeast 4 or 5, fair, good. Irish Sea, east or northeast 5 or 6, fair, good. Shannon, north 3 or 4, fair, good. Rockall, northeast 4 or 5, fair, good. Malin, east 4 or 5, occasionally 6 at first, fair, good. Hebrides, east or southeast 4 or 5, fair, good. Bailey, variable 3 or 4, fair, good. Fair Isle, southeasterly 4 or 5, but variable 3 or less in northeast. Fog patches in northeast, moderate or good, occasionally very poor in northeast. Faroes, southeast 3 or 4, fair, good. Southeast Iceland, variable 3 or 4, fog patches in northwest, moderate or good, occasionally very poor in northwest. And now the weather reports from coastal stations for 2300. Tyree Automatic, east by south, 3, 24 miles, 1026, rising more slowly. Stornoway, southeast by south, 3, 35 miles, 1028, rising slowly. Lerwick, south by east, 1, fog, 100 metres, 1033, rising more slowly. Wick Automatic, southeast by east, 3, 24 miles, 1031, rising slowly. Aberdeen, south by west, 1, 13 miles, 1031, rising slowly. Lucas, east-northeast, 4, 14 miles, 1029, rising slowly. Boomer, northeast, 3, 9 miles, 1028, rising more slowly. Bridlington, northeast, 4, 1024, rising more slowly. Sandetti Light Vessel Automatic, northeast, 6, 11 miles, 1015, now falling. St Catherine's Point Automatic, northeast, 4, 1015, rising slowly. Jersey, northeast, 4. 7 miles, 1014, rising more slowly. Channel Light Vessel Automatic, north by east, 5. 11 miles, 1016, rising more slowly. Milford Haven, east-northeast, 3. 24 miles, 1018, rising more slowly. Aberporth, east-northeast, 3. 19 miles, 1019, rising. Valley, northeast by east, 4. 1021, rising more.